One. Hi, everybody. We're back with our second part of a series with the author Paul Williams of the book that has been my Bible for the last 2 years, Operation Gladio. As you can see, I'm in my mobile command post. We are traveling today, and I want to welcome Paul Williams to the Colonel's Corner for our second episode. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Reporting for duty, ma'am.
Yeah. You are such a blessing to me. So I do want to acknowledge the people. Unfortunately, the way I have my setup here, I can't look at Rumble and StreamYard at the same time. So Bridget's going to feed me these today. So I didn't know that we had some Rumble rants, and I wanted to acknowledge our faithful follower, SR71. He's here for all of our shows for his Rumble rant. And I'm going to read it. Thank you, Colonel. And thank you, Paul, for giving us all the true history lessons. Then we had Saint Mass Hole, who became a monthly subscriber. Thank you very much. Also, Susan63. Words don't exist to describe my gratitude. Thank you both. Keep it going. Godspeed. Carrie says, Colonel is smart, can't slide anything past her. And then we had Kimmy, and it says, thanks for all your hard work, Colonel. I'm so glad I was able to catch this one live. So anyway, those are from last week. And sorry I didn't get to those in a more timely manner, but we've corrected that. Again, this is not my full-time job. So I had wanted today to focus on a couple of aspects of Operation Gladio. Number one being the money, and number two being the use of the boogeyman and how it has changed over time. So those are kind of going to be the highlights, takeaways of today's interview with Mr. Paul Williams. So I wanted to start with the money. And my high-level overview is I'm still trying to make sense in my head of the initial funding of Operation Gladio and how the transition during the Nixon administration to take us off the gold standard may have affected some of the initial funding sources. And then it just dawned on me very recently that that happened in the 71, 72 timeframe, and immediately sprung the creation of Nugan Hand Bank and the BCCI Bank, which we've already articulated were basically fronts, banks for the CIA to do weapons and money laundering and stuff like that. So I do think the timing is a little too coincidental to not be connected. So I'm going to ask Mr. Williams about his thoughts on those, and then we will move into the boogeyman conversation. So did you have any initial thoughts on that, or do you want me to go into the...
Well, allow me, Colonel, to preface today's conversation with certain things your listeners need to know. One is that the book that you're referring to, Operation Gladio, which also altered my life, contains over 2,000 footnotes. And most of the footnotes are the primary sources. I mean, this isn't like something that you just conjured out of pure air or not attributing to sources. And also the fact that a lot of the things that I wrote about and the people I wrote about, I went to those places and I met the people. Thirdly, if people think this is a conspiracy theory, I mean, Gladio was exposed by the European Parliament in 1990. I mean, this is anybody in Europe knows the reality. This is certainly far, far, far from a conspiracy theory. I mean, it's a reality, and it's still going on. And I mean, that's not a matter of debate. I mean, that debate's already concluded. So, first of all, I mean, fasten your seatbelts, because I'm not going to take you I'm not going to take you deep into my own secret conspiratorial thoughts. I'm going to take you into the realm of history and things that are documented and well known. So let's just start with that. That first of all, if anybody wants to test my credulity, I mean, as I said in my previous program, my background I have a PhD in medieval philosophy, so my background is in probing into things, and I became a journalist, and my primary task in Gladio, I knew nothing about it when I started this girl. I mean, this was a real journey for me, and the more I journeyed, I hate to say it, the more I realized that many of the books that I had written were all based on false information. And it was a day of really comeuppance. Uh, and the more I probed into this matter, the more documents I discovered. I mean, they're all, I mean, anybody wants to read the documents, just go to the footnotes in the book and see them for yourself.
So you bring up a very good point on how with each new revelation, you have to go back and reevaluate everything that you thought you knew.
Right.
And from a human nature's perspective, that's very disorienting.
Yes. Well, what happened was three of my books. One that was an enormous bestseller was called Osama's Revenge, the next 9/11, that came out in right after 9/11. As a matter of fact, it came out within 4 months of 9/11. Osama's Revenge, and it became an international bestseller. And I wrote subsequent books on radical Islam. I wrote another book called The Al Qaeda Connection. Once again, an extremely well received and a huge profitable book from my publisher. Then I wrote Crescent Moon Rising. I wrote a whole series of books on radical Islam because I thought that, wow, Islam really poses a threat to the United States, and these people, we have to watch them, and their activities have to be curtailed, and we have to watch anytime that a new mosque pops up in the United States. So I was writing about Islam from that perspective, and then I discovered that, hey, radical Islam was created by us.
So
let's face it. I mean, I had written 3 best-selling books. I had appeared on ABC News, NBC News, CBS News, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. All of these major news programs were just dying to talk to me because of what I was saying about Islam, and I was really perpetuating the strategy that
the strategy of tension.
The strategy that's the forces at play wanted me to.
So now let me just tell you how I just processed what you just said. You were a godsend to the CIA.
Oh yeah.
You had no ties to them, and you were a godsend to them, going on their mainstream media platforms and basically echoing what their propaganda was, and you knew nothing about it.
I knew nothing about it. No, well, I had a background in the FBI, as I told you that.
That's true. Right. I mean, you don't know that
that's a completely different agency. The FBI is national, and I was working with them in the matter of organized crime, which is significant because it brought me to the Vatican, to the mafia connection. But in any case, yeah, I was really the number one propagandist for false news. And I said it to my own shame because I was very well trained. I was very well educated. And when I came upon Gladio, it just knocked me on my heels.
And so you begin exploring this, and obviously you have the credibility to write about it. And how did that change your life personally?
Well, first of all, the first thing I realized when you delve into this and you go to Paul E. Hellawell in the creation of the CIA in 1947, you come upon the matter of drugs and drugs in the United States. So this had happened to me. I was on prescription medication at that when I was just starting to write Gladio, and one day I traveled throughout the country, appearing on shows, lecturing at universities and symposiums. Well, in any case, when I was going to get on a plane in Florida, as a matter of fact, by you, I figured, well, I better make myself presentable. So I figured I better press my clothes, the night before I got on the airplane. And I put one of my pills, tiny pills, in my pocket, and I pressed the pants. Now, this, of course, is well after 9/11. And I get stopped at the airport, and all these police officials come in. They said, you're carrying an illegal substance. I said, no, I'm not. And they said, yeah, we have to. They went through every part of. I had a strip. They took me to a room. I had a strip naked, including my underwear, everything off. I'm stark naked in this room. The agents come in with plastic gloves and they're going through everything. And they said, you're still carrying something. So what they discovered finally, I missed my flight. But what they discovered finally was when I pressed my pants, there was a tiny pill in there for my meds. And I pressed that into my pants, the pill, teeny tiny pill. And that substance had triggered all these alarms, and they were threatening me with arrest for carrying an. Now, the point is, Colonel, at that time, let's go back. I wrote, this is like 2014, 2015. I'm thinking, holy cow. They get a guy right like this. I've never naturally, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I'm a kind of a noted author, and I'm going through all this. And I'm thinking, man, these people can detect anything. Okay, so then I realized, why can't they detect all the heroin flowing into the country? I mean, this just doesn't make sense. If they have this enormous capability to detect a teeny tiny trace of a pill that had been pressed into my pants, how can they overlook the thousands and thousands of pounds of heroin that are flowing in here day and night? So when I started Gladio, like I said, the first thing that I realized was the drug connection and how the CIA was funded. And then I think I'm probably one of the first ones that read about Hellwell. I mean, I had to go back and that required an enormous amount of digging, because you can pull up the name of Paulie Hellwell, and he really transformed our culture, probably as much as anyone. And you're going to get nothing about him. You're going to get nothing about him. Very few things. They'll say, he was instrumental in the Castle Hill Bank that was established in Florida and things like that. But you're not going to get his connections to Shanghai Shek and the heroin trade and the inauguration of the massive drug trade in the United States by him. From any source. So you have to dig and dig and dig. So the first thing I uncovered was the drugs. And and then, of course, that raises other questions. Who brought the drugs in? And I was working with the FBI and organized crime. And when my work there resulted, this was a trivial. I wasn't sitting in a cubicle, answering a phone. I was working in the field, and my work resulted in the arrest and convictions of leading mafia figures, including a chap by the name of Billy Deloitte, who is the head of the Buffalino crime family. And the Buffalinos, of course, were the subject of the Irishman and I Hear You Paint Houses. And so I come upon the fact that the drugs, when they were brought into the United States, had to be distributed. And then I come up with the drug connection. And then I start digging into organized crime. And I realized that Lucky Luciano, during World War II, and Vito Genovese, were working with the OSS, even at that time, very, very closely. And then I realized that after there was a huge meeting of the mafioso in Cuba in 1997, and it was a huge event to honor Luciano, and Trafficante was there, and the Genovese were there, and Frank Sinatra was there. I mean, it was a huge thing, and that was when really they established a trade that the drugs would come from Southeast Asia. They would be there would be refined in Marseille. They would be shipped to Sicily, and from Sicily they would be shipped in as oranges, to Cuba and Traficante. So most of this had already been established as fact. So I realize, and the more I'm digging, I'm realizing that, and uncovering documents about really the initiation of the drug trade in the United States. I'm thinking, holy cow, wow. First of all, I uncovered the drug trade. I uncovered that that the mafia is involved, and then I realized that the instigator of the whole thing was Hellawell, and Hellawell, of course, became an official in the CIA, along with other people who were involved in the drug trade in Southeast Asia. And I started reading works by people like Alfred McCloy, who was really, I mean, his work was monumental. I mean, really, anybody should look him up, because he's certainly a significant figure, and I relied on his sources, and the sources were accurate. And Peter Dale Scott and other people like him, I mean, they were uncovering, and then I started to dig even further, and I realized that, okay, with the mafia trade and everything else, now we're getting to your point about money.
So,
Suddenly, overnight, because of the drug trade, you got billions and billions of dollars being made. And what are you going to do with that? How are you going to launder that money? You can't shove it under the bed of Alan Dulles or or Bill Donovan. I mean, what are you going to do with the money? So they channeled it, of course, originally through the Vatican Bank, the IOR, which was a perfect laundry, a sovereign entity within the sovereign state. So there you go. I'm just taking you to the background of the money, and the money. Well, you got to realize that the millions and billions that were coming into the coffers for black operations for the CIA became so massive that other laundries had to be established, including, like you said, the BCCI in Pakistan, and the Nugan Hand Bank in Australia. And the Nugan Hand Bank, everybody just look at, for your listeners, Nugan, Nugan, Hand Bank, set up in Australia. Please look, it's defunct now. It was shut down after the collapse of Saigon. But look at the directors. They were all CIA officials.
and retired generals.
And retired, read it for yourself. And once again, find out the same thing about the BCCI. And once these became not only, they were not only, but this is conspiracy. The church hearings, there were numerous Kerry hearings. It all came out about the dealings of the BCCI and the Nugan Hand Bank and the CIA. I mean, this was public knowledge. It was proclaimed from the floors of the Senate in the United States. I mean, you can ignore that, but the testimony was established, and it was condemned, and the CIA was equally condemned by the Senate, and it still not didn't matter. The affairs went on
because they didn't do anything to preclude it from happening again.
it
Because
was the CIA at that time, and the cartel behind it was much more powerful than the American government.
100%. I would say that's probably still true, but at least for a little bit longer. So now we've got that history established. I want to add in a few other layers of this. So we have the Marshall Plan, and in a couple of books that we went through on our book club, it's made very apparent that the Marshall Plan and the money that comes into Europe post World War II, kind of so we were talking about that on Secret Societies yesterday on a show that I do with a reformed Wall Street banker. And his point is basically because of the Depression, World War II gets us out of the Depression. They don't want the military industrial complex to collapse. And so they have the money from the United States going over to Europe in the form of rebuilding Europe. But there's money being siphoned off of that money because initially they are already in the process of setting up Gladio and needs money to buy weapons and all kind and training and moving people around. But we don't have the fully established drug trade yet under Paul Helliwell under our control completely. So they need some seed money.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right, Colonel. The Marshall Plan, was a plan that was inaugurated at the close of World War II to rebuild Europe, especially Western Europe, and there were really no controls on the spending, and naturally, a lot of that fund, especially since the CIA was just coming into existence and needed. Where was it? It wasn't allocated funds by where was it going to get money? So initially, they took it from siphoned it from the Marshall Plan in the very same way their money is now being siphoned from the Ukraine. It never stopped. I mean, that flow has never stopped. But in any case, what the Marshall Plan could only, even despite the massive allocations of millions, it wasn't enough. You got to realize that Gladio was the installment of armies in Sweden, in Holland, throughout the Netherlands, in Germany, West Germany, in France, in
Italy.
Italy, of course, Greece. I mean, there were standing armies there that were set up to ward off the spread of communism, despite the fact that we had given all of Eastern Europe to the communists. Okay, so let's go back to the Marshall Plan. I mean, McCloy wrote about that extensively, but that wasn't enough. And let's face it, the Marshall Plan was only for a limited amount of time.
Right.
The funds had to be allocated every year.
Yep.
And there was some accounting. There was some overseeing of the expenditures that were troublesome. So what happened is John Rockefeller Jr. stepped in and funded Gladio. Now, anybody that when you say Rockefeller, you say nobody. You'd think nobody has that kind of money. Well, the Rockefeller family at that time controlled not only the petroleum and everything regarding the petroleum industry, but they had emerged into a major importer and exporter of food and fruit. They emerged as a huge military power with their military plants. They were, of course, through oil. All the plastics, the pills that everybody was taking every day came from the Rockefellers. It was all they controlled in a monopolistic way, even after the so-called bank, the trust, the movements of trust busters. They possessed. They were the richest family in the world, far richer than the Rothschilds. So what they did was they gave really tens and tens of millions of dollars to create these stay-behind units because they were essential to secure and expand their own interest. But even the Marshall Plan and the millions from the Rockefellers were not sufficient, not to topple governments.
So that's a very important point from the perspective of Rockefeller wanting to expand his presence in the oil industry and kind of push the British, the Dutch. And so you have the deal making with, prior to World War II, you have Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles traveling the world on behalf of Sullivan and Cromwell doing deals for Rockefeller. And it just so happens those same people end up in the aftermath of World War II in charge of setting this entire apparatus up.
Yeah. Well, John Foster Dulles, of course, in the 1950s was the Secretary of State, and Allen Dulles was the head of the CIA. So I mean, they both came from the OSS, and they were both agents of the Rockefeller family from the get-go. So you're absolutely right. But the thing that I think everybody has to realize, and people should document from themselves, is let's cut back to 1947 when you're having this major uprising in Italy. It's really a war against the PCI, the Italian Communist Party, that has to be funded. You without the drug money, none of this could have taken place.
Yeah.
Let alone subsequently, and Colonel, as you know, what that led to is, the toppling of when we realized that we could take over, support the Italian Christian Party and defeat the Communist Party in Italy, that we could topple governments elsewhere. And of course, we immediately went to Iran, and then we went to Turkey, Greece, and then throughout South America. And eventually Gladio spread throughout the world.
So are you familiar with Alan and John Foster Dulles' sister, Eleanor?
Yeah.
And what I found completely amazing is there's the Office of Research and Intelligence in the State Department, which is kind of the conduit between state and CIA. It's like where the rubber meets the road. And during this entire time, she's in charge of that office, so that kind of led me down, and I don't think this point has been brought out as much as I should, but the interoperability of the State Department and their ambassadors, because you see the same ones like William Pawley repeatedly in countries where they're going to coup the government. Yeah. And you also have that conduit where they can take CIA officers that's been outed and hide them in state until they can re-identify them to put them back out in the field. The ability to use the State Department in conjunction with the CIA has been critical to their operations. Right.
Absolutely. And let's come back to something that's, I think, of great importance for people to realize. By the time, of course, let's cut to 1947, the Rockefellers. By that time, of course, you had the creation of the United Nations, and you had also the creation of centralized banks throughout the world, especially throughout Europe. Look at who set up the Federal Reserve in the United States, and you're going to see the Rockefellers behind the whole thing. They'll say J.P. Morgan, but yeah, he was a player. But it was really the Rockefellers, and because of that connection that they had, even when they first came together with the creation of centralized banks, you had with that establishment the creation of something that we now call the money cartel. Well, the Rockefeller family became yoked with the wealthy families throughout Asia, throughout Europe, all controlling, and they met regularly to control, the international trade, international economics, the flow of goods, the flow of commodities, and it all evolved into this very tight knit, and it wasn't even personal. It became almost mechanical cartel. It became all controlling. This is like the Matrix, but just look at, and it all resulted right now in the fact that most of the world's economy is controlled by three corporations. So Yeah, this is a massive development, but it goes back to Gladio, and it goes back with the funds coming from the drug trade, because those funds were really necessary to create this monster that now controls us all.
So, speaking of which, you make an excellent point. So, let's back up just a little bit further. Between World War One, World War Two, you have the Bank of International Settlements, which
Yes,
that leads into
yes.
the gold fund, Hitler's Black Eagle Gold Fund. So let me just lay this out for people. When they set up the Bank of International Settlements, which was supposed to be the central bank of central bankers, which provides them a forum after World War II to meet and do all of this manipulation. What Hitler used that bank for was every time he moved forward, eastward, and took over Romania, Czechoslovakia, whatever, their gold, he basically, his banker, Herman Slatt, or whatever you pronounce his last name, would call the Bank of International Settlements, which had a U.S. president at the time, and he would say, move Czechoslovakia gold to the German ledger. Move Romania's gold because to join it, you had to deposit gold there. And he was accumulating gold. And there was other sources of it where they were basically stealing it from people's physical residence. And so they had this pile of gold. And people have lots of questions about where that gold went.
Okay, can I back you up 1 second?
Yes.
Let's cut to FDR, of course, who comes to power in 1932. What does he do? This is in the United States. This is the first move off the gold standard. Roosevelt says, "Hey, we need so much money to get out of this depression that we have to confiscate all the gold. We have to cut." So it was illegal to possess a bar of gold. I don't know if people realize it was illegal. I mean, you would be thrown in the slammer if you had to surrender all of the gold to the government, and they paid you really what amounts to a pittance for the gold, and all of that gold became stored away, as you know, in the vaults of the of
Stored.
originally of the Federal Reserve. And then with the creation of the Bank of International Settlements, that gold is transferred to Switzerland. And once again, the gold that's confiscated elsewhere is also transferred to Switzerland. So you had the emergence of the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of centralized banks. It's still there.
Yes.
You ain't going there. You ain't going there. I ain't going there. Your listeners.
Another sovereign.
It's all. I mean, it's all incredibly well guarded. You're not gonna get anywhere near that. But that is still very much in existence and very, very, very much a part of the story.
So then we move to Asia because this, like you said, it's a worldwide thing. So what was happening at the same time during the Hitler confiscation, as you point out, properly so, FDR's basically confiscated the Americas, all their gold. Now have Hitler basically gathering up collectively a bunch of the European gold. At the same time, we have covered the book written by the Seagraves called Gold Warriors. And we did an entire book review on that. So Gold Warriors documents the 10 or 15 years prior to the start of World War II, where Japan, in their acquisition of Korea, Vietnam, China, Indonesia, all of those areas. So they're marching forward. They are taking everything: gold, diamonds, jewels, silver, copper. In some places, they went in and took the entire insides of like palatial palaces, including the kitchen sink. So as they're accumulating all of this gold, we'll just call it gold in general, but it's everything. It's ancient literature, like 1,000-year-old documents out of China. So they're collecting this huge amount of gold. They go to the Philippines and they dig 175 sites that some are as big as football fields underground, with booby traps and everything else. And they're using the slave labor of World War II POWs that they've captured in order to go underground, bury all of this treasure. And their last act at all 175 sites is to, as they're having their last night in that particular site, they dynamite the entrance with all of the workers in it, so no one would be alive to document where that particular site was. And they move on to their next site. They did that 175 times during World War II. Well, there's only a few people that knew anything about what they referred to as Golden Lily. And all of the royal family in Japan knew. But eventually, Singleb, who was infamous for his Filipino presence, finds out about it. And the CIA, working with a miner out in Las Vegas, who they tried to kill after he figured out how to interpret the maps, because the Japanese princes that were in charge of the Philippines at the time documented these coded maps on where all of these sites are. And so now you have, and this is trillions of dollars of gold. This isn't like billions that we may have gotten out of Europe. This is trillions of dollars of gold. So now you've got this gold captured here. You've got the European gold captured here. And as you point out, Roosevelt captured ours. And that's the point I had not actually made. I knew all about him doing that, but you're putting other pieces together for me. So now you basically have a monopoly on the gold supply.
Well, and that gold there was, of course, from Japan has a centralized bank, and continues to have that money that you're talking about that was sequestered in the Philippines. All of that eventually ended up in the vaults of the Bank of International Settlements. Let me add one more piece to this conversation. What happened is, and this is on a much smaller scale, but much of the gold that was confiscated from Jewish families during World War II, a lot of it ended up in Catholic Croatia, which of course was part of the Third Reich. And at the end of World War II, that gold was transferred to the Vatican. Now you're talking about a massive amount. This is substantial, trillions of dollars, and that money went from the Vatican Bank to the Bank of International Settlements. So yeah, I think a lot of the problems that we have right now stem from the fact that very few people know about the Bank of International Settlements. But secondly, that much of what we're talking about right now could be revealed just by simple task: audit the Fed, audit the Federal Reserve.
Excellent point. So now we've got all of the gold captured, not all of it, but a lot of it. And you fast forward to Richard Nixon taking us off the gold standard, because
internationally, yes. So
yeah, and so
all of our money is fiat money.
So when you have the gold and you've got the price at a pegged price, you take the dollar, disassociate it with the price of gold. Now, instead of setting on, I'll just throw a figure out, $10 trillion, as gold begins to rise, because it is not a pegged price anymore, they are sitting on not $10 trillion, they're setting on potentially $100 trillion as the gold price increases.
Right.
And none of this money is accounted for.
And we got to go to another point, Colonel, and that's the fact that since money becomes fiat money, that means our money supposedly is based on petroleum, but that's because it's used for the trade in oil, but it's really based on nothing.
Correct.
It's fiat money. There's no basis of it. I mean, the Federal Reserve can dictate what the dollar is worth. They could dictate that, not the American people, not the Secretary of the Treasury, the Federal Reserve can. They dictate the interest rate. They dictate everything about the fiat dollar. They manipulate it this way. But when it comes down to it, when the dollar collapses, and the dollar will collapse, and other forms of currency throughout the world collapse. When that happens, the one thing that will remain, and the one thing that will always remain, the central commodity of value is gold.
So the enslavement of people comes after we're taken off the gold standard, and you have BCCI and Nugan Bank created to further do the money laundering.
Right.
And they begin, because they in and of themselves are basically taking in dollars, and then basically laundering them. So you have a transfer of wealth happening around the middle class of America, because the more money and foreign aid we export out of America, in which we did starting after World War II to a significantly large degree, that's our wealth leaving. And at the same time, we're inflating the dollar that is used in America, and inflation is a tax on America. Right. And we're having to borrow the money to send the money out of America through the Federal Reserve, which is another tax on our wealth, because now they're siphoning off interest off of money made out of thin air. So this has been the enslavement of the American people without us realizing we have chains around us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And probably the greatest transfer of wealth in history has occurred since, the onset of the coronavirus. And I think all of that is engineered too. But we're seeing it right now. We're seeing a massive transference of wealth, not just into like an oligarchs in America. It's really into international banking concerns. Yes.
So I had one of the audience was asking basically if those banks, primarily BCCI and Nugan, although there's many that you mentioned, Castle Bank from Paul Helliwell, there's lots of these banks, but those two are probably the two biggest that I'm aware of. She was asking how were they basically used and where they were used at. Well, if you do the research on Nugan and BCCI, they had branches all over the world. They basically overlapped each other because money laundering is best done with two banks, not one. And so what you found is a lot of times they had a Nugan bank and a BCCI bank in the same town.
A little bit of I don't think that's quite correct.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah,
because the Nugan Bank was set up in 1970 in Australia. And
right.
You got to realize where were the drugs coming from?
Well, their focus was Asia, but you find
but you know why with BCCI? I'm going to tell you, they were based in Pakistan.
I know, but you find their branches in the same cities.
Yes, you do.
Shanghai, Hong Kong.
BCCI, I think, that came into being because of when the drug trade was no longer centralized in Southeast Asia, when it came into
Afghanistan,
Pakistan.
Yes.
That's why the necessity of BCCI there, because that's where the drugs were. That's where the drug trade was.
True. So, but at the same time, because the BCCI, if I recall right, is like 72 to 92. Those are kind of the years. And so for a fairly lengthy period of time, you're going to find branches of both of those banks in
Yeah.
the big ones like Singapore, Hong Kong.
Oh, there is an overlap, but I think that people have to realize that one came about because of the drug trade, which is, let's face it, by that time, heroin was the third most valuable commodity in the world.
Yeah.
So when the drug trade, after the fall of Saigon and and Ho Chi Minh and the triumph of the North Vietnamese, what you had is beginning there with the BCCI, you had the CIA funding drug lords like Heck Meyer and other people
Yes.
to cultivate the poppy fields of Afghanistan, and that's yeah. So
I
you
just
couldn't do this without access to money flowing in.
Yeah, I just found it very interesting. I did a chart where like they both had branches in London, they both had branches in Switzerland, and BCCI was actually registered in Luxembourg, although it's always referred to as a Pakistan bank. Its main office and dealings, the guy, what's his name, Abedi, his office was in London.
Yeah.
So I just find it very interesting that there was a lot of, and I just have to share a real quick story. One of my husband's best friends decided he's retiring, collecting Social Security now. He's going to move to Thailand. And I said, well, the one place you don't want to move is Chiang Mai because of all of the corruption there. And of course, that's where Nugent Han had a bank, BCCI had a bank there. And I'm like, there's a lot of crap going on there. And my husband looked at me and his eyes are real big and he goes, that's where he's moving. And I'm like, well, God love him, because that's not where I would be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, go ahead.
No, I mean, well, once again, is as long as people understand where the funding was coming from, and I think, just getting back to Gladio, and the fact that Gladio started as a stay behind unit, and then it evolved with money to really a much higher goal, and that goal was expressed by Brzezinski, the creation by this money cartel of Eurasia. And Eurasia, what could unite, come to create Eurasia, which is all one continent, Europe and Asia. I mean, there's not a geological separate, not an ocean between them. They're all one continent. And so what could come about with the creation of that, and of course the control of all of its resources? Well, that was that's a problem, and that was a problem facing Gladio, and this is huge to understand. Gladio already had proven its effectiveness because it had, like as I said before, it had toppled governments throughout the world. Toppled governments, installed its own military and political powers. But how could they get control of Eurasia? All these stand countries, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan. How can they get control of that? Well, this is what's key to, I think, and what this was the next thing that knocked me on my scribble while reading Gladio. The only way you could unite all these countries would stem from the fact that they were all originally part of the Ottoman Empire. And the people who inhabited these countries and still inhabit these countries, since they were part of the Ottoman Empire, share a Turkish culture, Turkish customs. Most of them, their ancestors all spoke Turkish. And but the one way you could unite them right now, in the 2025 and going back to 1995, the only way you could unite them was Islam. They share the same cultures, but they say they shared the same religion. The religion at that time was dormant. Islam was not a force. In many Islamic countries, they had been extremely westernized. Most of them, well, Iran, Iraq, where we've gone. They, especially Iran, it was one of the most modern countries in the world. Huge highways, bars, restaurants, movies, theaters, women. Nobody had a head covering. Turkey, nobody had a head covering. That didn't exist. So the only way to unite these countries, not only Islam, but militant Islam, they would call all these people to awareness that they were being oppressed and suppressed by Western powers. They could all become united into a mighty jihad, the mujahideen. And once again, you got to realize that you're going to the BCCI. You're going to the creation, really, of radical Islam, and which, as a force, that could unite all of these stand countries and be the first very, very, very significant step toward the creation of Eurasia.
So that's an excellent point. And that is why I speculate that's the reason why Turkey is in NATO. There's no sense at all for Turkey to be in NATO, except for the point that you just made.
Well, there's no sense for any of these countries to be in NATO. No sense at all. That was the European alliance. That was countries that were set up, of course, to if one was attacked. But I mean, let's face it. I mean, some of these countries that are bordering the Caspian Sea being part of NATO. Not talking about making the Ukraine. It's madness. It's crazy.
No, I know for the new ones, but I meant initially. There was no reason except for the connection that you just made, which Turkey, because of its head of the Ottoman Empire, they were thinking ahead to be able to use that as like their ace in the hole at some point in the future. But by having Turkey in NATO, that gives you your into that entire environment.
Well, you got that in Turkey. Just let's concentrate on that for 1 second. You have within Turkey, you had the toppling of under the gray walls. You had who were set up. There was a Gladio unit, and is a Gladio unit in Turkey. Well, from the gray walls, of course, came Abdul Gül, who was the president of Turkey, and now Erdogan. And between them both, sandwiched between them both, was a guy by the name of Fethullah Gulen, who ended up in the United States setting up madrasas and schools throughout the United States, all of which were to advance this pan-Islamic movement.
Yes.
But right now, if you're looking at world affairs and you're not aware of this, you can't understand what's taking place. For instance, with the fall of Assad in Syria. Well, why are Turkish forces there? Why is Turkey now, why are we now suddenly, all of a sudden, presenting Erdogan as this evil, evil, evil guy? Because it can all be used to create the strategy of tension. Turkey is pivotal to everything. First of all, Turkey has the largest standing army in Europe, but far and away.
Yes, thanks to us.
And so right now, what you're seeing with even with the events in Russia and in the Ukraine, in the Crimea, all of these things are and in the Middle East are all centered really on Turkey. And Turkey is the key. Turkey's the key to unlocking the chest and so that Eurasia can spring forth.
And because it's really the kind of operates as a bridge, if you will. What I found very interesting when we did the research into the attack on the Crocus, the theater in Russia, is the forces, and we believe to be Gladio forces, actually were documented as being in Turkey, which would have been kind of the prep work. They transited then to Ukraine, went into Russia on what we call in the military an ADVON, an advanced reconnaissance mission. They go back to Turkey, which would have been to be refining the plan. They go back into Ukraine and then go in and do the attack. And they're all documented as having come back through Turkey. They were pivotal in that attack on Russia.
Yeah. I would say that right now, if you're looking at a country of the most strategic and economic significance, it's probably Turkey.
And militarily, obviously.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is when you look at the levers of power, political, economic, and militarily, Turkey is sitting at a very strategic place.
Absolutely. Even when once you go from there, of course, Gladio, you got the involvement throughout the Balkans, and once again, that's you can't look at that apart from the significance of Turkey. But once again, all we're talking about is the continuation of an operation that began in 1947, and it's an operation that defines us today, and it will shape the future of the world. And unless people become more and more aware of that, and take action, and become more and more aware of not only what's taking place in Turkey right now and what's taking place in these stand countries, what's taking place in Iran, which is at the basis of the Caspian Sea, and the necessity of tapping and getting control of their oil and their natural resources. Yeah, apart from that, you can't understand modern world history without coming to terms with Gladio.
I agree completely.
You can't. Well, even in Italy, like all the during the years of lead, all those terror attacks, and all of this came to light. There's no dispute about it. The Fontana massacre, the Bologna bombings, the persistent attacks by the Red Brigade in Italy, which all turned out to be Gladio units. If you can't come to terms with that, and come to terms with the countries and what's taking place in South America and Central America right now, and the Gladio forces there, you're going to be lost. You're going to be talking about things that really have no significance.
So let's use that. That's the perfect pivot. So the initial boogeyman's communism, of which we've already, talked quite a bit about. So then you just transitioned us to the history of that pivot once the Soviet Union falls, and China's not enough of a threat to continue the communist boogeyman story yet. We pivot to radical Islam.
Exactly.
You articulated the perfect transition to that boogeyman and how it was basically formulated, created, and using Turkey as a pivotal place to do that with. So to me, what we also see as although we're still in the radical, now we're going to reinvent the communist with China. But I think these are being used now. And I'm not going to use the word distraction, although it is the first word that comes to my mind, because behind the scenes, as both of these things are keeping people's focus over there was a narrative being built with Ruby Ridge and Waco and Oklahoma of domestic terrorism. And we just also went through the process of Truman and Eisenhower creating the NSC memo 4512-2 that authorized covert, basically Gladio, through the CIA. And the establishment of that authority originally just had the word communist. So all they had to do was label somebody a communist and they could kill them. Well, it got modified, as you just articulated, with Brzezinski and all of them. they added "and terrorism" to the 4512 memo that authorizes then the CIA to take out anybody they label a terrorist. So
Right.
at the same time, they're adding the terrorism clause, and all pretending that all the terrorism is over there. They are creating a domestic terrorist narrative by Ruby Ridge, Waco, and you find out behind the scenes a lot of the FBI, ATF are all involved in the supposedly exposure. But in many cases, you find like the ATF agent that was embedded in Waco had lived with those people almost like part of a narrative building. And then you have Oklahoma with all the questions of that. You fast forward to 9/11. But Paul, one of the most interesting things to me is everybody that you talk to can see all of that over there. They can't see any of it here.
Well, if they can't see any of it here, then they're blind. Okay, let's just go to events that came to shape my life. They can't doubt. Well, Gladio, of course, the attacks, the invasions of different countries, the topplings of governments, uh, could only be initiated or supported by false flag attacks.
Yes.
So let's just start with the key false flag attacks in my life that nobody can dispute right now. First of all, the Gulf of Tonkin incident that brought us into Vietnam, into this major. Well, Johnson appears on national TV, and unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember this extremely well because it impacted me. You have Johnson announcing that the North Vietnamese had attacked the American fleet in the Gulf of Tonkin. There were hundreds of dead soldiers, on the shores, and that this was an act of horrible aggression, and therefore we had to deploy all these troops to Vietnam, which of course the whole thing was a lie. There was nobody was no naval vehicle was attacked on the Gulf of Tonkin. There were no dead sailors. It was all made up. Well, then you had let's fast forward to after Vietnam, you had the fact that in Iran, they're saying that there's a there's a huge problem there. The Shah is suppressing freedom, and that white revolution isn't really serving us. So and we have this false now. The Shah of Iran becomes a victim of a false flag, and what the CIA does is it imports the Ayatollah Khomeini from Paris on a CIA transport. Nobody can dispute that. I mean, that happened.
Yeah.
And therefore, we can manipulate the affairs there because Iran is on the basin in the Caspian Sea. Once again, one of the most valuable places on the planet. Okay, let's go beyond that. You have the first Persian Gulf War. George H.W. Bush is saying that Saddam Hussein, who was our friend and ally and our lion in the Middle East, had invaded Kuwait and is removing babies from incubators and throwing them on floors and killing all these people, and it's a horrible massacre. He's worse. George H.W. Bush, as a matter of fact, in an announcement said that he's much worse than Hitler. We have to take immediate action against him. Well, guess what? There were no dead babies on the floors of hospitals. There were, people weren't being massacred. It was all manufactured. Didn't have the fact that now Saddam Hussein is involved in 9/11. How, why this should, and he possesses weapons of mass destruction. Another false flag. So we go in there, we destroy Iraq. Then after that, you have reports throughout the New York Times, the Washington Post, newspapers I wrote for, all saying that in Kosovo, in the late 1990s, You have the Serbs are attacking the ethnic Albanians. There are caves filled with thousands of dead bodies. We have to bomb the daylights out of them. This is genocide taking place there. Well, guess what? There were no dead bodies. There were no caves filled with, ethnic Albanians. It was all a false flag attack. Then, of course, you come to 9/11 and 9/11, and you have subsequent events, including what's taking place in the Ukraine and what's being perpetuated by the media and by politicians. Ukraine consists of three parts, and the eastern part is the Donbass area, which is the wealthiest part of the Ukraine. That's where all of their oil is.
Yep.
That's where the natural gas is. The people of the Donbass region hold an election. They're all Russians. They speak Russian. They're part of the Soviet Union and Russia is their motherland. So that by a vote, they agree to be, they not agree, they ask to be part of the Russian Federation. Putin agrees, and suddenly his force, they welcomed him in the country. They said, we are now part of Russia. So the presence of Russia, NAVFOR, in the Donbass region constitutes an act of aggression. So therefore, another false flag, and therefore the present war, which is likely to exacerbate into something horrible. But in any case, there's false flag attack after false flag attack after false flag attack. And if the American people aren't aware of that by now, then what's going to wake them up? What in the world is going to wake them up? And plus the fact that many Americans right now are becoming aware, if they're not aware already, that the press is manipulating them. And they have been manipulating them from the get-go by Operation Gladio. Part of Operation Gladio was Operation Nightingale, in which all of these major newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, even in newspaper, like I said, once again, newspapers that wrote, every major newspaper became part of Operation Mockingbird, in which they, what they would do is they would proclaim the news that came from the belly of the CIA as being veracious and it had to be accepted as fact. So therefore, things like the false flags attacks that I've just talked to you about, were being sheltered from the American people by Operation Mockingbird, which is continuing to this day. And Operation Mockingbird was deemed essential, in quotes, to make the world safe for democracy.
I can't even hear that now without laughing.
Unbelievable.
So we're going to destroy democracy to create democracy.
Right. And of course, all that is oblivious to the fact that America was never a democracy.
Correct.
America was, but I mean, we're going into, but people are
just. This is all very, this is very important because everything that you just said, would people somehow say that all happened there? So and it's just, I'm living this in real time, as I know you are. So we know what we know. And the very first thing that happened with Trump's assassination, well, there's only one organization in the world that routinely has in their job jar assassinating heads of state under plausible deniability, of course. Mm-hmm. So not one time did anybody mention the CIA, mm-hmm. even when they began saying, oh, the FBI's corrupt, this, the Secret Service screwed up. And I'm like, hello, there's only one agency. And by the way, they've infiltrated many of the others. But the same thing just happened recently with the attack in New Orleans, the attack. So you see all of these attacks happening and they have a narrative. Those two attacks and several others all focus on special forces. They're trying to create a narrative that the military is out of control, that we've created some monsters. So if there's ever a situation in the future, which I believe they already have planned, that would require us to use our military, they want to have the ability to discredit it in the lead up to that event. But again, they don't ever even go. The TikTok ban that just happened with the Supreme Court today, right? They say that was all based on national security. Well, who comes up with the intelligence for the national security designation for the ban on TikTok? The CIA. Have they ever been right on any national security threat ever? No.
Yeah, but once again, we're coming back to the same point about the American
I know.
people. I mean, when are they going to wake up? And what really is taking place right now, which is really terrifying, is in the beginning when you had the creation of this cartel, you had people like Cecil John Rhodes and Alfred Milner and these people, Nathan Rothschild, who were actually people and came together and mapped out strategies. Okay, well, that has now evolved into this cabal of international banking, which is completely impersonal and oblivious to human beings, just to advance one issue. Uh, we're being dictated by completely impersonal and international interests that, in many cases, are not even human.
Well, they don't act like they're human at all, because
No,
they have
they're
no
not.
respect for humanity at all.
Everything is becoming, as AI can roboticized, and you're seeing it at an increasing rate. And once again, that's very alarming because that's what we're faced with right now. And that's why certain things have to be really initiated by the American people, and it has to start with an audit of the Federal Reserve, and then it has to proceed from that to an extensive audit of the CIA and an accountability of the black funds.
So I agree with you. Walter made a point when we were talking about the finance thing as a potential solution. Let me just read this comment. I'd love to have your thoughts on it. All we have to do is collapse the banking system is for Congress to demand the Federal Reserve to fulfill its promises. There is not enough physical gold in the world to cover the debt. And he talks about the difference between the Federal Reserve note and Congress's duty per the Constitution. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, once again, this is all part of really part of it, part of Gladio. Uh, what you have to excuse me. What you have to realize is let's go back to your point. I'm sorry, I got temporarily distracted by my own insanity. What did you ask me again?
About the when you're talking about auditing the Fed,
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to the Federal Reserve. Number one, it's not federal.
Right.
Let's look at it for what it is. It's not federal. It has private shareholders. It's not public.
Correct.
Not federal. The shareholders are by and large international bankers. Okay, it's not a reserve. It's not a reserve for our. If you go to places like Fort Knox, people will be horrified. There's no gold there. It's not a reserve. It's vaults in New York are now empty. You know that. I mean, that was on the news. It's not a reserve of gold. That's uh, and another thing about the Fed is it is certainly not concerned with the plight of the American people. What's concerned is the expenditure of incredible funds and the creation of more and more of this paper money, and in order to place us further and further and further in enslavement. And that's going to occur. I mean, that's the number one concern I have, because when the bubble bursts, and surely it will, right now you see the vast and majority of the American people right now aren't even accustomed to going to work. And they think that somehow that the government will take care of them. And they somehow think that the only action that they need uh, is to believe the government and be subservient to the government officials. Well, really, the thing that's needed right now, Colonel, my humble estimation, is real revolution. Real revolution is economic. When people become aware of what we're talking about, if they rather than just chatting about it, or rather than just uh, uh, delving and delving and delving into it, what has to happen is a movement has to be created where a real revolution, where we say no, no, no more black ops, no more toppling of governments, no more manipulation of the American people, no more false flag attacks. And we're going to tell you why. We're not going to pay our taxes. That's revolution.
That definitely
That's
would be
revolution.
revolutionary.
That is revolution. Anything short of that, Marx taught us.
But
Anything
don't
short of that is talk.
do you think that that's the impetus behind Trump saying that he's doing away with the IRS and going to go
Well,
to
I think that Trump got a good whiff of it. I think he got a good whiff of that cobble and the fecal matter that it generates through. I think that permeates his nostrils. But let's hope so. Let's hope so.
because I do
Let's start. Two things I would encourage President Trump to do. Uh, just as a guy that's been through the school of hard knocks and learned about these things the hard way. One thing, and I think everybody should push this, is it would all begin with the Fed, and then it would go there for the audit of the CIA.
Oh God. And I've said this repeatedly on social media. Since the government's already paying me my retirement, I would volunteer to take this mobile command post up there and do it for free.
Yeah.
I would be the one to go in there with a team of people and do the declassification and tell the story. And of course, I'd have you on a big monitor in my office up there. Paul, what's this mean?
Yeah, but of course these things. What I'm saying, of course, is a pipe dream. These things will probably never come to fruition.
Oh, I believe they will. Paul, I don't think any of that's a pipe dream. I think that's exactly the reason why Radcliffe was put in charge of the CIA. I said, as soon as I heard who they announced. Now, because you have to keep in mind with Radcliffe at the CIA, he was the only one that told the truth about COVID. He stood against all 17, as the DNI stood against all 17 intel agencies and told the truth. I think the one person that could do that is Radcliffe. But my point was he needs to go into the CIA, hand out pink slips, turn the lights out, lock the door, put a for sale sign, collect all of the paperwork, and take that to a secured location and just have an entire team of people doing declass. And all of the stuff gets declassified. It gets put out in narrative form about what our government has done in our name and that we are never going to do it again.
Yeah. Good luck. I'm running out of time, Colonel. But yeah.
Well, I'm not yet.
Well, we'll meet again.
We definitely will meet again. And again, because I want to be respectful of your time, we're at our hour and a half point. We will get together and schedule another one. I do absolutely love this. I know the audience does. The comments are just flowing. And so thank you again. You are such a wealth of information. And I know I think there's kind of a twofold thing here. It's almost as if I've been in your brain and I didn't know you. But look, I want to go back to your very first point about how well footnoted your book is, because one of the very things I learned when I did research for my various master's degrees, like when I was at Air War College, is the one thing you do when you are reading is you turn back and you look at all the footnotes. Because the footnotes validates the author's words. And I made a list of books when I first found your book, of books that you used as reference. I now own all of them. because I don't take anybody for face value. And the information that you provided in that book, as you said, when you found it, you had that same effect on me. My entire world had been destroyed by reading that book, only because for 30 years, I thought we were the good guys. The sacrifices that I made, the deployments that I went on, the long hours, the missed birthdays of my children was all worth it to me because we were the good guys. And the knowledge that all was misinformation, and it was done on purpose to disguise this evil empire that I didn't even know existed. And I tell people, the only thing that I've ever had happen in my life, and it's kind of a silly thing, is I lived in Los Angeles. I was stationed at Los Angeles Air Force Base for 3 years. I lived there for 6 months, driving in from Long Beach every morning to the base. And it was at the 6-month point where we had a clear day, where the wind had come in a different direction. And there was this massive mountain that I'm looking at when I got on the 405 to go to work. And I'm like, what the hell is that? Where's that been? Because the smog for the first 6 months that I lived in LA covered the entire mountain. I didn't even know it existed.
Right.
Your book took the smog away from the mountain so that I could see what really existed there.
Well, great. Thank you, Colonel.
So my mission immediately began from that day forward to take your massive amount of research and spend every single day, every hour that I can, sharing it with people. That is my mission now. Through various forums, I go on probably 10 shows a week, talking nothing about your book except your book and Operation Gladio. It is getting out. We are hearing people now not only just talk about it. There was a movie made, Badlands Media, a network, an independent network that I appear on probably once every couple of weeks on various shows there. Just recently did a movie, and in the middle of the movie, your book with the cover and half of the movie is about Operation Gladio.
Well, let me tell you, it's strange to say this, and once again, I'll conclude with this. When I wrote Operation Gladio, immediately AMC purchased the rights to make a movie, and they had everything lined up, and there were already the locations. They had we had a wonderful screenwriter, John Richards. I had a wonderful producer, Michael I. Levy, who's one of the leading producers in Hollywood, big time movies. The Fast and Furious, his 3 Men and a Baby. I just think of some of the titles that he did. He's a big time producer, and then we had a big time cast. And we even got a John Dahl, who's a leading director, involved. And immediately in the middle of that, everything's in place. The movie, everything comes to a halt. So I'm, and right now people keep coming to me. They want to make a movie of Gladio, but I don't think that certain powers want that movie to be made.
The CIA owns Hollywood. They would never allow that movie to be made.
Yeah. That's true, and I'm going on right now. I mean, I'm talking to people in Italian production companies who are very interested in it. And
one place you can get it made is Italy.
Well, they're very much aware of Gladio, and they're very much aware of everything else. So, I'm just sitting tight. But I mean, it's the main. Look at it this way: the mainstream media is not going to cover.
No, that's why it's up to us. So I have a guy that he's on a lot of my in the audience on a lot of my shows. He goes by Illini because he's a University of Illinois guy. He's in finance. and has done an amazing amount of research into Chile and Allende and the coup down there, and very, very smart. And he just echoed, he said, I bought several books on the footnotes of Paul Williams' book. So I just want you to know that through your work and my crusade about your work, that we are making a difference. And
you're doing good. You're doing
it's
good.
not the amount that I would love, but I know why that is. I know that a lot of our information is not going to be well received. Having gone through it personally, my hardest audience is veterans when I take this message to them, because it's a cascading effect of, well, if I didn't do it for the reason why I thought I did it, then why did I do it? And then you realize, to the extent that in some cases people dropped bombs and killed people for all of the wrong reasons. And there is a particular process that you have to go through in order to reach those people without losing those people, because it is a very, very difficult process.
Well, once again, I would encourage people to become informed. Just look at the events that have shaped our lives, and look behind there. And once again, document it all for yourself. That American people have been fed lies and lies and lies, and to this day it persists. It doesn't stop. And the people that are writing articles in major papers aren't even trained journalists anymore. They're just and what you're reading is far, far, far from what's really going on. So
yeah, I always tell people you're reading a story, not the story.
The story, right? Yeah.
Okay, well,
Thanks.
yeah, and again, thank you, Paul, for being here. I want to respect your time, and we will definitely get together and come up with a new date for, because I have a whole laundry list.
Okay.
So anyway,
okay.
Thank you everybody for being here and watching the show today, and just stay tuned for the announcement of our next show. Thanks.